Hi, my name is Jenny Castle, and I'm here representing the Forsberg Art Gallery at Lower Columbia College. I'm here with Crystal McBrayer, who is a photographic artist and the creative director and adjunct instructor at Boise State University. Crystal, thank you for joining me today.
Of course, glad to be here.
Can we start the interview with having you talk a little bit about your path to becoming an artist, a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I grew up in the mountains of Western North Carolina and lived out in the middle of the woods for a large part of my childhood. So, as an only child, I basically spent my summers and my days picking up rocks and leaves and making artwork out of them and digging through the dirt and making fishing poles to fish in the creek out of sticks and twine. And my love of nature, I think, is what really fueled my sense of creativity. So I started out in my undergraduate degree at Appalachian State as a physics major. And I was really interested in optics and how that worked and how our eyes responded to light. And I did physics for 2 years and decided that I needed a break. So I came back to school after a year of really kind of soul searching and decided that I wanted to do something creative. So I took a photography class and instantly fell in love with photography because it combined my love of the kind of science aspect of physics with the creative aspect of being able to really kind of put my voice into what I was working on. After undergraduate degree, I worked as a commercial photographer for a year, doing assisting for a lot of professional photographers, and really decided that I wanted to go back into a master's program to really kind of focus on art. I loved teaching. I loved being able to work with others on what they were wanting to create. And so I went to SCAD for my master's, and then that kind of made my history from there.
So now you're living in Idaho. I'm assuming still connected to nature in a lot of ways, um, and you've mentioned that that's at the core of your creativity. So would you say being in the natural world drives your work, or I mean, where do you find inspiration to make new work now that you're an adult?
Certainly. I would say all of my inspiration for all of the work that I do has everything to do with either spending long periods of time in nature or trying to create that sense and that same feeling when I can't be in the nature. Like everyone, I'm stuck in an office for a lot of the day, or I can't go outside, especially now in Idaho because there's wildfires or random things like that. So my inspiration comes a lot from watching nature documentaries when I'm stuck at home with children, that have gone to bed and I, can't go explore the outside while they're here. And still wanting to kind of find that sense of calm and that sense of peace that the nature provides. I really find that kind of calm when I'm out in the middle of the woods or out in the middle of a creek. And so my work is kind of a reflection of wanting to maintain that feeling, whether I'm actually taking the work from being in that nature or trying to recreate it by another means.
Can you talk about some current projects you're working on? We're in a kind of a strange time with isolation being imposed on us in a different way. So I think a lot of people are trying to get out into nature more and are having more of those types of experiences. So where does your work fall into some of those feelings and experiences that you're having right now?
I have a couple projects. Where Mountains Once Were is a project that stemmed from being out in the woods and having that kind of deep connection to nature, finding that solitude, that ability to collect myself in the woods, um, and really kind of thinking about how I can attain that feeling if I don't have the ability to be out in the woods, whether it's working in an office all day or just not being able to step outside because of life that happens. Is there a way that I can find that peace and that solitude, that kind of consolation to the nature deficit that you get from being inside, um, by ways of creating artwork in a kind of an artificial way? So that project came from watching hours and hours and hours of nature documentaries, actually trying to um, feel that sense of solitude and nature and the calming voice of David Attenborough. Can that give me that same sense of being out in the woods? And so the work kind of came from that, as like not just capturing a landscape, but actually trying to fit that emotion of what it feels like to have the breeze rustle through leaves when you're out in the middle of the woods, or what it feels like to sit by a creek and hear the water rushing over the rocks.
Were you able to find that peace?
I think part of it, yes. So that same sense of creation and meditative aspect that happens from kind of thinking through that, I found myself being sucked into a computer, working on manipulating the images or capturing them from a TV screen, and really kind of thinking about ways that I can just isolate those moments. So instead of being focused on all of the chaos that's around me, I can really focus. And I found that that's kind of what gave me the peace from being out in the woods. It wasn't that I'm constantly doing something; it's that I'm sitting there and really kind of reflecting inward. So the producing the artwork, I think, allowed me to have that same kind of pause and that same kind of internal reflection that I do when I'm outside.
Um, can you talk a little bit about some artists that have influenced your work over the course of your career? Your themes have been consistent, and so where have you drawn inspiration from throughout your time as an artist?
Inspiration as a young artist, I found myself looking for artists and finding artists that I thought made really interesting work and would kind of strive to make work that felt similar or looked similar. And I realized as I matured as an artist that it never really felt like my work, because it wasn't me, and it wasn't kind of my passion coming out into the artwork. It was me just kind of mimicking other artists. And I think once I kind of realized that I just needed to make work that I was passionate about, I started researching more artists that had um, concepts and themes that were more what I was interested in, and reading a lot more about science and reading a lot more about, kind of how nature affects us. Some of the artists that I've been looking at recently, Dorn Authority certainly is an inspiration to me. Her work in archiving Eden was very influential, and just the way that she, um, was interested in um, cataloging in one way, but also showing that artistic vision that came through it. So she kind of has this side by side project of documenting spaces where the seed banks are happening, and then taking the seeds and making them into her own artwork and her own vision. So that certainly has been influential in my work, and trying to think about how I can have an idea or something that I want to illustrate, and really kind of putting the work into the science part of it, even if nobody ever sees that part, and then creating the work from there. Certainly, David Meisel is another person that is very influential in the way that he thinks about work, photographs work, and has, an kind of um, a desire to almost change people's minds about what he's photographing, just by the way of seeing it.
So, I mean, when you were starting talking about artists that influence you, I feel like you gave some wonderful advice to students. The idea of being true to your own voice, and using research as a way to lift that voice versus mimicking another. Is there any other advice you would give to students and young artists that are striving to keep art at the center of their lives?
I think that's the biggest challenge, is that, really you need to make sure that it's your voice and your passion that you're wanting to do. And other than that is just doing it. I think a lot of times we get sidetracked by other things in life, or we get too caught up on making something that's perfect. And so just making and making and making, and half the stuff is, garbage that you throw away, or, but, that constant repetition of making stuff on a daily basis, I think, even if it's just a sketch, or if it's, typing something on your phone in the middle of the night so that you remember it the next morning, just having that constant thought about work that you're passionate about.
Crystal, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today. Crystal McBrayer will be part of a group show at the Forsberg Art Gallery this fall called A Quiet Stand. Crystal, thank you.
Sure. Thank you for having me.